r/ask Reddit, posted by Reddit user Do It Anyway 54321. Serious. Travelers of lonely roads, explorers of the great outdoors, workers of creepy jobs and late night shifts. What's your scary story? This didn't happen to me, but a friend's mother. In the mid-90s, she was a substance misuse worker in London. Really loved her job. Said it definitely had its challenges, but overall, it was super rewarding, and she genuinely enjoyed the interactions with a lot of the service users. She was so creeped out from this one incident that she not only quit the job, but she moved out of London and back to her hometown. She got back from a day of work, which generally involved driving to the homes of people with or recovering from substance abuse issues, checking in on how they were doing, sometimes administering drug tests, asking about job interviews they might have lined up, etc. Around 5 p.m., she did the regular back-to-home stuff of making and eating dinner, watching some TV, and having a shower, and finally going to bed. She wakes up in the middle of the night and isn't quite sure why. Takes a second for her eyes to adjust, and then she realizes there's a man at the end of her bed. A few more seconds and she realizes it's a service user, though not one she knows well, because he's only been recently added to her caseload, and he's holding what looks like a machete. He doesn't say anything, just stands there silently staring at her. Amazingly, her professional brain kicks in, and she starts talking with him with all the conflict resolution tricks she knows. Speaks as if what's happening is perfectly normal. Asks what he's been up to since she last visited, how's the book he was reading, any new job leads, etc. Finally, she offers him a cigarette. Thank God she hadn't already quit, although if I recall correctly, she did soon after, which he takes. They smoke together, and he leaves without issue. My friend's mother never really explained the fallout of the situation, what happened to the man, etc. Or if she did, I don't remember. But the one super creepy thing I do remember is that she said there were no signs of forced entry, and the police said she must have not locked her door. She, however, was adamant that she locked the door as soon as she got home, because it's always the first thing she did. To her, this made the whole situation even worse, because it meant he was somehow already in the house when she got home. I was on a backcountry hiking trip with a couple of friends. We'd been hiking for about 4 days and had spent the past couple of days completely off trail. We were miles and miles from somewhere any casual person would be camping, and we hadn't seen a soul since we left the parking lot. Anyway, I wake up in the middle of the night to find my friend, who I'm sharing a tent with, just staring at me. I'm a bit creeped out, but I assume I've woken up because of him staring at me. But then from outside our tent, I hear a woman singing, and realize that's what woke me up. This is completely impossible. She sounds close-ish, and we definitely would have clocked someone camping that close by. It's clearly a woman's voice, and I'm the only woman on our trip, so it definitely couldn't be anyone from our group. And I've heard mountain lions that sometimes sound a bit like people, but they sound like a woman screaming, not singing. It was pretty windy that night, and it being the wind is the only slightly plausible explanation for what we heard. But again, it sounded so clearly like a human woman singing that I can't totally convince myself it was only the wind. My friend sits up like he's going to get out of the tent and check what's up, but I get this horrible wash of dread come over me, this feeling that if I let him leave the tent, he won't come back. I'm not afraid of the woods in any way. I've spent a lot of my life backcountry hiking and have had several run-ins with wildlife, weathered bad storms with not ideal equipment, and never have I ever felt one tiny fraction of the fear I felt that night. We stayed up till dawn just huddled in our tent together, freaking out. The singing lasted about an hour, and then just stopped, and we didn't hear anything weird for the rest of the night. The next morning, we checked around the camp where there was no sign that anyone had camped close to us, and our other friends had slept through the night and didn't hear anything weird. The rest of our trip was normal, but I'll never forget that night. I have no explanation for it, and I have never known anyone who experienced anything similar. I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood, a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10, I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyway, it was a nice night, uneventful trip, but when I got home, my roommate was coming out of the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going to work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute, and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning, and he was going in like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did in that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5-something in the a.m. My roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit and then called my friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about all these years later. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired. No one could have slipped anything in either of my 2 Coors Lights I had. No known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like this since. I just don't know what happened to that time. I've posted about this before in another thread, but I feel it fits here. So this happened on my shift, graveyard. I was helping another short-staffed store across town. Had a woman come in. She seemed a little frazzled, and is carrying a Bible, but otherwise, she seems fine. She buys some chips and then starts talking to me about this crazy coronavirus stuff, yada yada. Then she tells me she ate an evil spirit pretending to be a clove of garlic. I of course think she's just messing with me, but no. She pulls out a piece of garlic, lays it on the counter, and starts telling me it isn't garlic, and it is in fact a demon that wanted to possess her. She then starts asking me if I believe in spirits, or if I can see it, because despite looking like I'm one of the humans, that's a third demon. I'm really a human who's a third angel, who was sent to Earth to help her expel the evil spirits, and urges she feels that it's okay if I didn't know because she can see it, and she leaves the garlic on the counter and tells me she'll wait for me to deal with it. Now that's pretty much where the original incident ended. A few days later, about 2 a.m. maybe, 2:15ish, on a Tuesday, I'm working the graveyard shift at my usual store when this woman pops up again. She proceeds to buy the same chips and sort of hang out, asking me about jade, the jewelry type, and incense, and if we've met before. Nothing as weird as before. Now the weird thing is, I didn't hear or see her come in before she approached the counter. We have a loud-ass siren thing that turns on when the doors are opened, and only shuts off when they are closed, which is normally not a big deal, but considering I'd been stocking and cleaning in front the whole time, and had only gotten 2 or 3 customers beforehand, yeah, it was a bit weird. She hangs out a bit longer, then rushes to the restroom, and doesn't walk out of it until about 6. Says have a nice day and just walks out the store like nothing. Which freaks me the fuck out because I cleaned the restroom a little bit after she went in, and she somehow had managed to slip out or hide somewhere when I went to clean them. Outside of hiding in the stalls, there was nowhere to hide in the restroom, and there's no windows to slip out of. And like a jackass, I looked up at the top of the stalls and the ceiling, thinking she had pulled a Spider-Man. But nope, she just poof, disappeared then reappeared, and left super casual a couple of hours later. TLDR, customer told me she ate a demon trapped in garlic and I was a half angel. Then a few nights later she shows up again, pulls a Houdini in the bathroom, and randomly exits the restroom and leaves the store a couple of hours later. I used to walk to and from elementary school. Most days I had a little pack of other kids from my neighborhood, but for whatever reason, one day I was walking alone. I remember reaching the crosswalk, where the crossing guard offered me some gum. I took it, but I didn't chew it. As I crossed the street, I had an odd, dazed feeling and looked around. When I started crossing the street, it had been a sunny afternoon, but as I crossed it, it was a bright, starlit night. I remember the sky being really full of stars, like I'd only seen out of the country. I panicked and ran across the street, and when I was a few steps down the sidewalk, it was suddenly daylight again, just like it was when I started crossing. I turned to look back across the street, and the crossing guard was gone. I have no idea what happened or what caused what I saw. I wonder if it was some kind of microsleep, a hallucination, a brain injury. I've never met anyone who has had any explanation for the experience, and I'd really like some closure on it. Security guard when I was 20 years old. I patrolled several buildings in rundown areas with low businesses. One of the buildings was a medical treatment center / daycare place for seniors. I always hated walking the halls after hours. One night, I was walking and heard piano playing. I thought someone was playing a piano in a large communal room. I walked there and saw there was no one at the piano, and I got very spooked. As I had gotten closer to the piano, I saw someone had left the classical radio station playing on a boombox behind the piano. I laughed it off, but something still felt odd. I went up to the second floor to check all the medical rooms that were locked up. After checking about 4 doors, I reached out to grab the final door handle. I pushed the handle down and moved it more than I should have. It was clear that it wasn't locked. I decided to open the door and see if I could set the lock from the inside. The moment I pushed the door to open it, something from the other side pushed back hard. My first instinct was to push harder. I don't know why. That's what my head told me to do. The door opened a bit more, and then another use of force from the other side came, nearly closed the door fully. I stopped pushing the door and realized $8 an hour wasn't worth whatever was on the other side of that door. I slowly let go of the handle, backed away, and walked out of the building. I locked all the exits so whatever was in the building couldn't get out without keys. No clue to this day who was in there and why. This story did not happen to me, but rather to my mother's friend. It was the early 2000s to set the scene. She was a younger woman who worked for my mom. She was very sweet, very beautiful. She was out having a good time in Las Vegas when she met a man. He seemed to have a lot of money, and as she came to find out, he did. He was a rather successful businessman in the area. They spent the weekend together, laughing, enjoying each other's company, and unfortunately for her, hooking up quite a bit. I'll explain in a minute. During the whole weekend, he was so adamant about her staying. He loved everything about her, at least that's what he said. When she told him that she had work and family out in California, he was upset, but said he understood. He asked if she would be willing to come back the following weekend, flight paid for, and all amenities taken care of. She was taken by the offer and accepted. However, when she had gotten home, she noticed a rash starting to develop around her lips. At first, it didn't bother her. Slightly itched, maybe burned a little. But as a couple days had passed, her lips had gotten redder and the rashes started to form bumps. She had gone to the doctors, complaining about the rash on her lips. After doing some testing, the doctors had asked her to sit in a separate waiting area. Fearing the worst, she thought she might have gotten an STD from her new lover. But it was much worse. The doctor entered in with a detective. She was confused. The doctor explained that the rash on her lips had bacteria on it that was only found on decomposing bodies. She was shocked by this and told him it must be a mistake. The doctor asked her to calm down. She wasn't in any trouble, but she did have to recount everywhere she had eaten and drank in the last few days. She recounted all the restaurants. When the doctor asked if she had been with anybody, she mentioned the man that she met in Las Vegas. This news launched an investigation with the Las Vegas Police Department. It turned out that the man she had met was not who she thought he was. Upon investigation, they found several bodies of ex-lovers of the man's in a deep freezer in his house. It turns out that the man had been covering up the rash on his face with makeup. With the money he had, it was probably easy to cover it up. This man had been wooing prostitutes and killing them, and eventually, eating them. My mom's friend wasn't a prostitute. She was just a young woman who liked to have a good time, and it seemed like the man was so infatuated with her He was willing to risk her going back home. Since that man and my mom's friend had hooked up over the weekend, she had caught some of that bacteria on her mouth, which explains the rash. The man was arrested and is now serving a life sentence. Justice was served. But all I can keep thinking about is how my mother's friend almost turned into dinner.